As a constitutional law attorney, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and the Supreme Court of the United States has declined to hear the appeal of Derek Chauvin. You remember him as the Minneapolis police officer that was convicted at trial concerning the death of George Floyd, or as our good friend James Lindsay likes to call him, the BLM martyr. And so what can we learn from this? How should we analyze this? Did they make the correct decision in declining to hear that? They didn't give a reason. I'm going to talk about all of that and more after the break. And then I want to replay the interview from last August with Egg Nationalist, one of our favorite and most popular guests on this podcast, because we talked about Derek Chauvin when he was initially appealing his case to the Supreme Court. And Egg Nationalist nailed it in his commentary then and an article that he had published then, and basically predicted this outcome. So I thought it was very timely to give the commentary of what is going on currently in this case, and then have a reminder of what Egg Nationalist predicted as of August. So we will take a break here, but coming up next, all things about Derek Chauvin. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to your to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you. So we're going to get to a couple of top headlines this morning. And first, the Supreme Court has rejected Derek Chauvin's appeal. You remember him as the police officer out of Minneapolis that was found guilty in the contentious and very highly publicized case concerning the death of George Floyd, or as our good friend James Lindsay says, the BLM martyr to the cause. And, you know, it's looking more and more through everything that has come out through the trial transcript and the jury selection and some of the things that were not available to the defense in terms of the jury selection and some of the jurors' biases, that this does appear like a railroaded trial. And interestingly, now on appeal, the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday declined to hear that appeal. The court did not specify why it would not take up the case. And from a legal perspective, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So the first is that the Supreme Court, just generally, one of the criticisms that conservatives rightly have had about the court and about the tendency of the Republican nominees to be more prosecution-oriented than defense-oriented. And what we mean by that is that Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is, of course, Biden's appointment to the Supreme Court, is the first justice who has previously been a public defender. And so most of the Republicans that are appointed do not have a defense background, but more of a prosecution background. And that just tends to be a split between Republican or conservative-oriented lawyers versus liberal or leftist-oriented lawyers, that a lot of conservatives tend to go the prosecution track, and a lot of the bleeding heart liberals will go the defense track. That's not true. I know that that's a very generalized statement. It's not true for everyone, I should say, that it's a generalized statement, but it tends to be categorically just how that goes. And I mean, that was true for me initially in the beginning. I thought that my calling for the Lord in law was to be a career prosecutor. And I was a prosecutor in Colorado. And then based on the politics, interestingly, that was in Weld County, ended up not being a prosecutor and turned to the defense side. And that gave me specifically in just the cases that I was involved in to see a different viewpoint from this kind of orientation toward the prosecution is always on the side of the truth and nobody is over prosecuted, and you're the white knight, the white hat, and the prosecution is implementing justice in society. And this is, the great the great use of the justice system only to put bad guys away in prison, right? I mean, and that's how it should be. If we are a legitimate, morally upright society, we should only be prosecuting people that the prosecution can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which is our criminal standard in law, have done what they are accused of. But often in our now, in what has become the weaponized criminal justice system, a lot of prosecutors will overcharge and use plea bargains and plea agreements to plead down to what defendants should have actually be charged with in the first place. And that really frustrated me as a defense attorney to go to the prosecutor and say, listen, you're charging what you think you can get by with in terms of a preliminary hearing, which is the probable cause hearing, to say, is there sufficient probable cause for the prosecutor to actually proceed on their case as charged? And prosecutors would do that. And I would say, why aren't you charging what they should have been charged with? And then we can actually plead it down from there, because that would be an actual plea bargain. Why would my client plead straight up to something that he should have been charged with initially? I mean, go to trial, and then even if they're found guilty, then it's no different than the plea agreement, and then we can argue sentencing to the judge. But a lot of prosecutors, and the way that the system has been manipulated in America, is not really with the interests of justice in mind. And in Colorado and most states where I'm still licensed, I'm a licensed attorney out of Colorado. I live in Florida now. Florida doesn't allow you to waive into the bar. You actually have to take the whole bar exam. Haven't done that yet. Not sure if I'm going to do that anytime soon. But so I'm still licensed out of Colorado. But just speaking for Colorado, but most states have a rule of professional responsibility that is specifically for prosecutors. It's what is known in the practice as the higher calling of a prosecutor, that you pursue the interests of justice. Justice is your client. So, in other words, your prosecution should not be based on political considerations, should not be based on your like or dislike of a particular defendant. It certainly should not be targeting a man and looking for the crime. It should not be any of these other considerations. And sometimes the interest of justice requires that you don't prosecute someone. You see that the evidence, even after initially what you think happened, then there's eyewitness testimony, there may be forensic type of evidence, there may be, all kinds of things that come out as the investigation is continuing, that you as a prosecutor would say, I can't ethically continue this prosecution. That happened to me a number of times as a prosecutor when what was initially charged, then looking at the evidence, talking to the investigators, talking to the defense lawyers even, and other witnesses, then then I would say, okay, this was either overcharged or it deserves to be dismissed outright. And that actually is the interest of justice. And when I was homeschooled, as a lot of our regular audience knows. And so I discovered my passion for law and the philosophy of law, the interest of justice and all that at a very young age. And I volunteered at the Boulder County District Attorney's Office for several prosecutors that had this understanding of the interest of justice. And I watched them, even sometimes in the midst of trial. A witness would recant once they're under oath, or, something else came out and the defense came with this other witness that they, whatever happened. And I would see these prosecutors even halfway through their own case say, Judge, I no longer can meet that standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'm withdrawing the charges, and I'm asking for the court to dismiss that. And that is truly pursuing the interests of justice. And so when we look at a case like Derek Chauvin, just my personal opinion, looking at what happened in jury selection, what happened in the overly politicized case, I think this guy was railroaded completely. And he deserved, at minimum, a new trial based on the jury selection, based on how the case progressed, and I think the legal bases on which his defense attorneys appealed were substantive and should have been taken up by the Court of Appeals and especially by the U.S. Supreme Court. So circle back to what I said initially about the tendency of conservatives, and we have a conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court. That's a good thing in most instances. But where sometimes this can be a negative or a disadvantage is that a lot of the more conservative judges tend to give the benefit of the doubt to prosecutors so much that they aren't willing as much to protect the rights of the accused and the defendants and even the convicted. And so it was disappointing to me that the court did not take up this case. And I think in part it may be because the left-leaning judges, and of course I'm speculating because they didn't give a reason, but the left-leaning judges obviously want this conviction to stand because they're all pro-BLM and the leftists and all of that stuff. I mean, we know that from some of the public comments of the leftist judges. And then the right is saying, well, the prosecution did its job. The jury did its job. We don't want to touch this, right? And that's not how our system should work. It also has been very apparent that the court increasingly is very hesitant to take up very high-profile, politically charged cases because they don't want to appear political. But interestingly, when they don't take up a case so that they don't look political, they are being political by not doing it. And that's what happened, in my personal opinion, with the Texas versus Pennsylvania case that was filed by the attorneys general in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And when they filed that case to the U.S. Supreme Court under an original jurisdiction theory, and the court declined to hear that, it was so politically charged. And that's not a good reason, because I think that the attorneys general in that case had established an Article 3 original jurisdiction case or controversy. And so the Supreme Court didn't have an option but to hear it. Now, in this case with Derek Chauvin, this is an appeal not as of right. And so the Supreme Court didn't have to take up the case. They weren't obligated in the same way that I believe they were in the Texas versus Pennsylvania case, because it wasn't original jurisdiction. It was an appeal. But they should have taken it up in the interest of justice. The Supreme Court is known as the court of last resort. And if the conservative justices really wanted to shoot an arrow straight through the heart of a weaponized criminal justice system, this would have been the perfect appeal to hear and to look at what actually happened from a legal perspective. They're not fact finders at that point. It's just as a matter of law and constitutional protections. And they could have given Derek Chauvin a new trial. And of course, would the left have kind of gone ballistic? Sure, but that's not their concern. That shouldn't be their concern. Was it their concern that this would have caused national outrage and we'd have another, summer or winter of, riots like we did in the summer of 2020? Well, Okay, but that's not their call. They shouldn't be looking to how's the general public going to respond. This is why the justices have lifetime tenure, so that they don't have to worry about politics and policy and their approval ratings and all of that kind of thing. So I think that this is a travesty of justice all around. And there is a new documentary that is titled The Fall of Minneapolis, and it's by a woman named Liz Collin, and she was actually on Fox News on Monday night with Jesse Waters, and this is just her introduction of why The Fall of Minneapolis and this documentary about the Derek Chauvin trial is so important. This is cut one.
So how badly were the American people lied to?
Gosh, it's hard to condense this, Jesse, in a short segment, to be honest. And that was really why we wanted to put out this documentary, to give people a look at the lies really from the start. And we're still all paying the consequences of them. This is the very first time the police body camera footage was withheld from the public by Minneapolis police. That was for a reason. So we start the film right there with here's what you were not allowed to see. That was only leaked about 2.5 months later. You have George Floyd complaining that he can't breathe before Derek Chauvin even arrives on scene. You have a black officer who arrested George Floyd that day, and Alex King, and we speak to him quite a bit in the film. Remember, this is supposed to be the most racist police interaction in American history, but nobody talks about the black officer. You also have on film the officers who are calling for an ambulance 36 seconds after George Floyd himself asked to be laid on the ground that day. And people should be upset. They should wonder, why was this kept from them for so long? I myself was working in mainstream media at the time, and I knew there was a lot more to this story and was really disgusted about what the press knew, what they were privy to, and they were refusing to pass along to properly inform the public about what went on.
That was Liz Collin, who is the producer of this new documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis, and the truth behind the George Floyd incident and Derek Chauvin and the trial, and pointing out, that doesn't that upset the Supreme Court justices to hear what was withheld not only from the public, but also from the trial, and also the issues with the jurors that withheld their bias in jury selection, and that only came out later after the fact. What about fairness in our system? Our Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to our U.S. Constitution, more amendments and more protections are in our Bill of Rights in the context of criminal defense, because our founders understood how easily and how blatantly the state could weaponize the criminal justice system against defendants who it's very costly, it's time consuming, where the state has virtually unlimited resources. And so I'm very disappointed in the Supreme Court for not taking this up and not even telling the public why they didn't. If there was a legal reason that they thought that they couldn't, I would love to know that. I would love to know why they didn't. And so you can find this documentary. It's called The Fall of Minneapolis at thefallofminneapolis.com. If you can spell Minneapolis, you'll get there. If you can't, you might get to some other website. So make sure you can spell Minneapolis correctly. But it's thefallofminneapolis.com. And this is the last clip I also want to play, because in this documentary, this is the first time that Derek Chauvin himself talks to Liz Collin in this documentary about the technique that he used, that he says he learned from the Minneapolis Police Department, and the trial and why it was so unfair. So this is cut 4.
This call is from a federal prison.
During the trial, several witnesses, including Chief Arredondo and Inspector Blackwell, testified that they didn't recognize the technique you and the other officers were using, as if it was not a part of Minneapolis police training. But was MRT, the maximal restraint technique, part of training and policy?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. 5-316, maximal restraint technique, right in their written policy manual. The EMS and Minneapolis fire response was not normal. Normally, both those resources are sent. They arrive in short time, especially on a code 3 situation. In this case, Minneapolis Fire took 20 minutes plus to arrive, and their station's 8 blocks away. At the end of the day, the whole trial, including sentencing, was a sham.
Wow. And isn't that just a travesty of justice? And there are other of the Minneapolis Police Department officers who also say, and they actually accuse some of their leadership of perjuring themselves during trial, talking about this maximal restraint technique and saying, no, this was something that we were taught and this was a sham. And so we are almost out of time for this segment, but go to thefallofminneapolis.com. And this is where there have to be legislative solutions to all of this, and with some of the loopholes that prosecutors and leftist-oriented, weaponized prosecutors are implementing when they're not pursuing the interests of justice. And people like Derek Chauvin and many others that we could cite across the country are then pushed toward conclusions that aren't truly just. And that is a travesty. We need to have legislative solutions, and we need to ensure that our justice system actually is the best in the world. Because right now, I genuinely don't think it is. And I think it is a far cry from what I was taught and trained as a young lawyer, and even before I was a lawyer at the Boulder DA's office when I was just volunteering, that prosecutors' only client is justice and the interest of justice. Now it seems like a lot of the left, it's just social justice and politics, and that's all they're after. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you. All right, so we need to talk about Derek. That is the headline from Raw Egg Nationalist in The American Mind, which is a publication of the Claremont Institute. And this is a really important topic that I think a lot of conservatives and the right in general just doesn't want to talk about because of the controversy, of course, in 2020 and the summer of riots about how George Floyd in that case sparked a national outrage, in fact, some worldwide outrage. I mean, I remember in Europe that statues were being toppled just because of something that took place in Minnesota here in the United States, which totally doesn't make sense. But here to talk about his piece and why we need to talk about Derek Chauvin, who, of course, was the police officer who was convicted of the murder of George Floyd and is now appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court, is our good friend Raw Egg Nationalist, who is an anon on social media and a good friend of the show. So, Raw Egg, welcome back.
It's wonderful to be back, Jenna. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a really fascinating piece, and give me your breakdown in terms of why, and I think you're right, we do need to talk about Derek Chauvin.
Well, so first of all, people probably don't know that Derek Chauvin has for some time been trying to appeal his conviction for the third-degree murder of George Floyd. So he took his appeal, first of all, to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, where it was turned down, and then he tried to take it to the Minnesota Supreme Court. They turned it down. So now he's trying to take it to the National Supreme Court. And the article really is about what might actually happen if the Supreme Court decides to take to consider Derek Chauvin's case. And the thing is, I think fundamentally people are forgetting the insanity around, or people have forgotten the insanity around the case. And it raises it raised at the time, and it continues to raise all sorts of very disquieting questions about the possibility of getting a fair trial in America in very particular cases, in particular in cases of supposed white on black violence, any kind of case where you have a white defendant accused of violence against a black person, as in the case of Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. And during Derek Chauvin's appeal in the Minnesota Court of Appeals, interestingly, the prosecution actually admitted that it would have been impossible to move Derek Chauvin's trial anywhere else in the state of Minnesota, because it just would have been impossible to avoid, the media frenzy. And that was a central part of Derek Chauvin's contention, that he just couldn't get a fair trial at that time because of the way that the media had been whipped up, because of the fact that the courthouse was defended by National Guard troops. It was just impossible to find a jury that wasn't prejudiced against him. And in effect, the prosecution in the Court of Appeals case admitted that. And so, as I say, it raises very disquieting questions about the possibility of a fair trial for certain individuals in America. And it's a problem that I think is only going to get worse.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I had said at the time when I was actually doing a separate podcast, I had said at the time that this case wasn't so much about the actions of this specific police officer. It was more about the collective so-called white guilt that the leftists like to impose upon a society that is trying to be informed by critical race theory, which is stemming from cultural Marxism. And this case in particular, in the summer of 2020 and how everything unfolded, was much more about the overall view of social justice than it was about trying one individual for a specific set of circumstances. And if we go back and we actually look at this particular appeal and some of the things, just for example, what the jury didn't disclose before they served several members of the jury, a few of the things that are legal bases to get a new trial. Typically, it's very fascinating to me, just from a legal perspective, that the Court of Appeals and the Minnesota Supreme Court declined to even hear a further appeal. And I think this does, raise a lot of questions about the merit of a system that is supposed to be for justice, and justice is supposed to be blind. But how justice has, in some cases, and I think this is one case, really has not been blinded to the greater social issues that are plaguing American society today. And one of those is critical race theory and social justice. So let's talk about the current composition of the Supreme Court, because that, in my view, is going to be really fascinating to see if they will accept this appeal and actually grant a writ of cert and hear this, and if the consideration of potential fallout in terms of whether that's riots, protests, whatever it is, if that will weigh into the justice's view at all. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is a very, very interesting time in the history of the Supreme Court. So we have nominally a conservative majority, and the Supreme Court has shown that they're not averse to handing down decisions that go totally against the liberal grain. And obviously the case that comes to mind is Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, which overturned Roe v. Wade. I mean, that was, we've been told oh, this is coming as soon as the Supreme Court, turns conservative, then of course they're gonna try and overturn Roe v. Wade. But I don't actually think that many people really thought that it would happen, and then it did, and they did it, and so that at the very least, suggests that the Supreme Court is now in a position where it will consider cases that will totally go against the direction of progress as liberals see it. So on the face of things, at least, then yes, I mean, I see no reason why they wouldn't take up Derek Chauvin's case. But then what you have to consider is what happened in 2020, the unprecedented racial rioting that took place. I mean, rioting on a scale that America had never seen, that did enormous damage that compounded the terrible economic and social effects of the pandemic and made life much, much harder for small businesses and for hardworking Americans. You have to think about that. There absolutely would be riots again. And the thing is, the riots in 2020 were whipped up by Democrat politicians, and they would be whipped up again. And you only need to look at the fallout from the Dobbs v. Jackson's Women Health Organization decision to see that actually a lot of Democrat politicians are quite happy to do that. AOC, for instance, she was when Judge Kavanaugh was a big target of protests around the Dobbs decision because of course of the Christine Blasey Ford fiasco in advance of his admission to the Supreme Court. Now she was laughing and joking about the fact that Kavanaugh was harassed in restaurants and that he had to had to leave restaurants and people were constantly bugging him. And then of course somebody turned up. Actually, this was before the decision. This was when there was a leak and it was suggested that the Supreme Court was going to overthrow Roe v. Wade. Somebody turned up at Kavanaugh's house with a gun and with masking tape and was arrested and admitted, yeah, I was going to kill Judge Kavanaugh and then kill myself. So this is a dangerous time, and politicians on the left are totally happy to intimidate and browbeat judges and to weaponize the legal system. And so that would absolutely, I think that would have to be a consideration for the Supreme Court when it made its decision whether or not to, or when it makes its decision whether or not to hear the Chauvin case.
Which I think is so incredibly untenable and unfortunate in the history of our nation. I mean, this is exactly why we have institutions of government, and particularly a judiciary that is supposed to be fair, impartial, unbiased, and not take into consideration social sentiment, any animus against a particular party of the case. I mean, any of these things should not weigh into the legal decision-making and opinion rendering of the Supreme Court justices, but we know that they're not impervious to the world around them. They still live in this country as well. And I think it's a fascinating contemplation here because they would have to know that this is what the left does, and what the left really does best is to try to tear down our social institutions of government, like the judiciary, with exactly the examples that you just gave. And that's what they love to do best. So this would be simply a pretext for these racial grievance machines, as you term them in your article. And I think that's a great description, is a monstrous racial grievance machine that's ready to be fired up at a moment's notice. Its most visible organs being groups like Black Lives Matter. I mean, so all of these things are in a sense playing into the left's playbook. But at the same time, at what point then do the justices say, well, we want to show our independence and we want to completely disregard that, like they did with the Dobbs opinion? Even the leak draft of the Dobbs opinion did not deter or dissuade them from making their judgment and making that a very broad opinion that overturned Roe versus Wade. It was the right constitutional opinion. But there's another factor here that I also want to get your take on, because interestingly, if the justices took up this appeal, in terms of the Supreme Court composition, it tends to be that the conservative wing of the branch or the conservative wing of the Supreme Court, and as opposed to the leftist branch, tends to be not as sympathetic to criminal cases in general, whether or not there are criminal cases that they ultimately reverse. Of course, that happens, but it's been long commented by a lot of members of the legal profession that we don't have defense attorneys that ultimately get on the Supreme Court. And we have former prosecutors, but we don't have former defense attorneys or former public defenders. I think actually Justice Jackson is one of the first, if not the first, that has the background that she does. And I think that was a factor in the Biden administration's decision to nominate her, beyond the fact that she's a woman and she's Black and all those things that they can't define, but obviously they do define because it's social politicking that way anyway. But my question to you is, do you think that whole cadence of how the Supreme Court generally treats criminal defendants could factor in here? Because I could see the Supreme Court taking this up and then ultimately ratifying the conviction, so that and not that they would do that knowingly just to have some kind of social justice, but that they would take it up knowing that it's likely to be predisposed to that particular outcome anyway.
Yes, I'm no legal expert, so I can't talk as a legal expert. But yes, I think that there are so many factors involved here, and it may very well be the last time that a case like this sort of comes before the Supreme Court. I don't know. I think the politics and society are changing so quickly now that it's really quite difficult to keep up. I think it's worth noting that this is a case that concerns far more than just Derek Chauvin, and that's something that I try to bring across in the article. This isn't just about Derek Chauvin. This is about the left's modus operandi now in particular kinds of legal cases that it has a deep interest in. The use of judicial intimidation, muddying the waters, the kind of things that we saw when Clint Ludwig went on CNN with Don Lemon and called his grandfather, who had been accused of the attempted murder of Ralph Yarl, called his grandfather a racist, all that kind of stuff where they're muddying the water. It's about that, but it's also about, I think, an attempt to refound America as a different kind of nation, as a nation whose sole purpose or whose main purpose is radical racial politics and redistribution. And this is what we see with the 1619 Project, for instance, where you redate the American founding to 1619. Why? Because that's when the first slave ships brought the first Africans to America as slaves. That's when the American nation began. That's what America is about. Actually, America isn't about the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. It's about racial injustice. And, these figures like George Floyd in particular are essentially martyrs to the cause. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other figures like that are the martyrs to the cause. They're the saints, the founders almost of this new racialized vision of America. And so the Supreme Court has a choice to perhaps to rule not only on Derek Chauvin's case, but also on this radical new vision of an America that's much more like Zimbabwe or South Africa than anything the founding fathers ever envisaged.
Yeah, and I think you're completely correct that this case in particular is one that, if justice is not followed in terms of a fair trial, and those of us with the opinion that Chauvin did not get a fair trial for the reasons that he raises in his appeal, would like to see the Supreme Court follow American jurisprudence and our U.S. Constitution in all of the protections in a criminal prosecution that are afforded to every defendant. There is not a carve out in the U.S. Constitution for, well, if this is social justice, then there's a different set of standards than there is if this is, quote unquote, regular or traditional justice. And that's really what the left is trying to do here. And as you point out in the article, Raw Egg, this is really about the left taking taking this whole critical race theory and other Black murder figures in recent years, and even like Trayvon Martin as well. And you mentioned Breonna Taylor, but George Floyd as kind of one of the biggest saints of the radical left in terms of this new radicalized mythos of America, as you call it. And I love how you ended the piece where you're saying, in truth, whether the Supreme Court has a part to play in the deconstruction and discrediting of the hagiography that has been created for George Floyd is anybody's guess. The court could just as easily ignore the case if its members care about their personal safety and that of their families, as well as the continuance of the institution in its current form or any form at all. They would probably do well to choose another case instead. But nothing can change the fact that if the true promise of the American founding is to be preserved, the new counter histories and their sacred figures must be challenged and ultimately revealed for what they truly are. And I think that conclusion is really what this particular case is all about. And I would hope that the Supreme Court, in its current composition, I mean, we kind of know what the three extreme leftists would do with this case. But if the majority of the court is willing to set aside the whole notion of social justice and critical race theory, and they're willing to employ genuine, true, legitimate, meaningful justice as our founders intended and codified in the protections of our Bill of Rights, then they should take up this case and they should require a fair trial. So in just the last 2 minutes I have with you here, what would you say then if this is left as it is, what is the commentary on where we are headed as a country if ultimately someone like Derek Chauvin is simply a victim of social justice and critical race theory, and our highest institution just turns a blind eye to that?
Well, as I said a moment ago, I think that America will be heading very definitely towards a situation that makes it look much more like post-apartheid South Africa or Zimbabwe. So we're talking about a nation with a two-tiered justice system that is committed to the redistribution of power and wealth and land, and that will tolerate injustice as long as it benefits anybody but white people. And that's the key thing, I think. I mean, this is basically what we're looking at is what Sam Francis called anarcho-tyranny. And that's a situation in which basically the tax-producing white middle classes will be hemmed in, they'll be controlled by all sorts of different means, by prejudicial laws, high taxation, which will then be redistributed to minority groups, and not that they will be minorities anymore. And then you have a kind of managed chaos that sort of terrorizes the middle classes. So you have endemic crime that goes almost totally unpunished. I mean, that is the bleak future, I think, that actually is coming for America if this new racialized refounding, this new mythos of America as a radically racist nation that needs to atone for its history isn't overthrown.
Yeah, and this is a completely different worldview and ideology and social justice and critical race theory than what America was founded upon. The true nature of actual justice, meaningful justice. Social justice is nothing more than revenge, really, for perceived collective harms. And we're seeing how that is playing out. If the ultimate source of justice, civil justice in our nation with the U.S. Supreme Court as the court of last resort, as it's known, doesn't step in. So it'll be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. And we need to continue to stand up for true, meaningful justice rather than social justice and call out the worldview and ideology distinctions. So thanks so much, Raw Egg, and for your commentary. And the piece, again, is in The American Mind, which is a publication of the Claremont Institute. And the headline is, "We Need to Talk About Derek." So thanks so much for joining, and look forward to talking to you soon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Jenna.
My friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help you get the best night's sleep of your life. He didn't stop at the pillow. Mike also created the Giza Dream bed sheets. I have them. I love them. These sheets look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep, which is crucial for our overall health. Mike found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's latest deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you will receive 50% off the Giza Dream Sheets marketing prices down as low as $29.98, depending on the size. So go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use promo code Jenna, Jenna. There, you'll find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and so much more. I have all of this. I love it. Everything from MyPillow and also mystore.com. You can use promo code Jenna. So go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, and also mystore.com. And remember, use the promo code Jenna.